Hello, everyone. I'm Pedro Guerrero, co-founder of the Alumni Society, and I'm excited to kick off Hispanic Heritage Month by welcoming you to our second A2A Alumni to Alumni event of 2021. One of the many benefits of being a member of the Alumni Society are the lessons we learn from the connections we make in this group. Our shared experiences are conducive to a connectivity that we simply don't get anywhere else. And it's in sharing these experiences with each other where we learn and glean impactful takeaways that can be immediately applied to our lives. Today, we're going to talk about adaptability and learn from 5 featured speakers who have managed to adapt to very unusual circumstances. And like with any good Alumni Society event, we also want you to leave with some new friends by taking advantage of our networking session shortly after our program. Lastly, I want to thank our sponsors for their ongoing support, for the effort to raise Latino leadership, and for incorporating DEI into everything they do. Their support today is a reflection of the commitment they've made to the Latino community. We could not pursue our mission nor host great events without the generous support of AbbVie, Accenture, AEG, Bank of America, Capital One, Facebook, Goldman Sachs, and KKR. With that, here's our agenda for today. Shortly, we'll hear from 5 speakers. Each will have 10 minutes for their talk. Afterward, we'll be moving to the lounges for networking. You'll get to move around freely and meet with fellow attendees. So without further ado, I want to introduce our first speaker, Andrés Acebo, Chief of Staff, Assistant Counsel at New Jersey City University. Andrés, take it away.
Thank you, Pedro. I'm first and foremost honored and privileged to even be amongst today's group of speakers, and even more honored to even lead this conversation and this event off today. I want to share the few minutes that I have with everyone and talk about my first gen epiphany that essentially emerged in the heart of this and in the midst of this pandemic. To rethinking about the way we accept the quote-unquote conventional wisdom and the ever importance of defining success for ourselves. I found, and not trying to be hyperbolic here, but I found success in the most unique of circumstances by defining it early on by others. Having others define it for me. Being a first generation kid, success was marked by how I was going to make my community proud, make my parents proud, but principally, and it became even more apparent as I got older and as much as I got into my professional career, of how much distance I created between where I started and where I found myself. And in that came kind of a heartbreaking realization that what propelled me to success is what I was leaving behind. I'd be remiss to not acknowledge that a lot of what's propelled me forward is the sacrifices of my community and that of my parents. You know, at 18, venturing off to college for the first time, being the first in my family to do so, that journey, that endeavor of the unknown, paled in comparison to what my parents sacrificed and pursued. To realize that at 18, I was off, venturing around College Hill at the same age that my dad was using this compass to chart a course to this country in search of refuge and freedom. That context of the hardship and the sacrifice that had to be endured for me to have the opportunities that I have today made me rethink of what I wanted out of my career. And yes, the pandemic helped facilitate that, right? You read the statistics now of the half of all Americans in their workplace are rethinking what they want out of their careers or making job moves and changes. I was very blessed early on that a lot of my career was focused in and giving me the opportunity to be in the room where difficult decisions were made as an attorney representing governmental entities and businesses, and often being the lone person with my unique background and perspectives. And that gave me a heightened sense of responsibility that I, had to bring my community with me everywhere I went to be an ambassador for my community. But eventually there was a wedge that what quote unquote marked me as being successful wasn't sparking joy, right? It wasn't fulfilling me. It was only driving me further away and driving more distance between where I started and where I was quote unquote finding success. Realizing that the old adage is not always true, that you sometimes can go home. I found that a lot of the things that I was doing in my after work activities, the quote unquote extracurriculars, my nonprofit and philanthropic pursuits, to really invest in my community, was really what was sustaining me. And those were the spoils of success. And being able to reject this narrative of what Simon Sinek calls the false choice of work-life balance, that really immersing yourself into your career, but making it your life's work, rather, is where this real success is found and cemented. Every day now, I get to come to work in service of the community that propelled me forward. I work at New Jersey City University, a public anchor institution, a Hispanic serving institution, where 90% of the students come from communities like the one I grew up in, that are many instances are first generation. And every single day, I get to use the opportunities that I've been afforded, the skills that I've been able to forge, and drive an institutional mission, and shoulder to shoulder with people that think every single morning of how they're going to improve the lives of those that come after them. And without having to compromise a sense of security, which is something that was worrisome. Often folks think that you have to give something up to be happy. And that's a lesson, and one that I had to be malleable to and open to. And in all sincerity, I think recognizing that but for the pandemic, I might have not been open to that realization, that I could be poised to be in a position to be happy and enjoy what I do and be successful. Once I realized that I could unshackle myself by these almost impossible obligations and commitments. I remember thinking once, trying to navigate the hidden curriculum of being a first generation college student and young professional, hearing my parents say things like "estudia para que no tengas que pasar trabajo," and reckoning with the when does that kick in? Because it feels like I'm really stressed out and anxious all the time. But realizing that the thing that's motivated me and sustained me was another lesson that my parents and many immigrant parents teach their kids, right? That dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres. And I found that the virtue of that, right, in the work that I do, the people you partner with, and that's what my education has afforded me, right? That unlike my father, who had to, with nothing but the clothes on his back, venture off in pursuit of refuge, my education has charted my course. I've just, for far too long, was limiting my opportunities because I was subscribing to a very limiting view of success, right? Making partner early on in my career, ambition, there was no seemingly limit to what I could accomplish on a very old and stale paradigm that was forged and made by folks that didn't have my lived experience. And in that was a hard reckoning to realize that how could I be quote unquote successful and not happy at the same time? And this pandemic only further intensified that. I began the pandemic right at the time of the national lockdown with our 6-month-old hospitalized in an ICU, losing my 36-year-old cousin, Air Force veteran, to this pandemic, being confronted with the frailty of life and the limiting time that we have and what we do with it, and that I've been given this privilege that is sometimes hard to frame, right? To recognize the very privileges that we do have, even as a first gen, right? That I get to traverse and live on this hyphen that has been my strength, right? That I can navigate 2 cultures and 2 worlds, and that I have an obligation almost like, and at times can feel like an awesome burden to make a community proud and be representative of it, but a happy pursuit nonetheless, right? That you can dedicate your professional endeavors to improve your community, and that you don't have to sacrifice your personal happiness in that process. That being the privilege of being able to define success for yourself is key, and one that you'll be a better steward for your community if you submit to that, and so that is the lesson that I learned, right? The importance of being able to chart your own course. And the grand irony of this is that it's been staring at me my entire life, right? It's just the narrative of success, of pursuing something that meant leaving where I started as far behind as possible, was a hard thing to reckon with. But that I found, ironically, true happiness and success by coming back home and bringing the skills and experience and education that I was privileged amongst our community to accept, and harness that to be a force to be reckoned with and to empower others. I will leave you with one more piece of advice of this epiphany, and it's a token of like where you learn it from the most unlikely of places. And when we were prepping for this, we were talking about losing, how some of us in the Northeast had to reckon with these flash floods and Hurricane Ida. And I was thinking about how we reckoned with that. And I can think back last summer when we had a few storms and we lost power in my home. And my then 6 and 4-year-old were fighting me to who got the candle first so I could light it. And my 4-year-old was fighting and saying, I want to get the flame first. I want to get the flame first. And my 6-year-old looks at him and it's like the flame doesn't extinguish when you light another candle. The room gets brighter. And it struck with me. It's like that's what we're doing here today, right? We're lighting each other's candles. We don't diminish our own light when we try to brighten other people. The room gets brighter. And it's with that I have the pleasure to pass it on to Valeria Aloe, principal and founder of Abundancia Consciente, who's going to be talking about pivoting our mindset by overcoming limiting cultural narratives. So Valeria, thank you.
Thank you so much. It is an honor for me to be here today. And the type of adaptability that I want to talk today about is the one that happens from within. The adaptability that is an inside job, and the one that invites us to transform our mindset as Latinos and Latinas to embrace the bigger and better opportunities that are showing up for us today, and even better, to pursue, to go after, to create those opportunities for us with self-confidence. So I will be talking about the cultural mindsets, particularly the limiting cultural beliefs. And what happens is when immigrants like me, I'm from Argentina, or immigrants from anywhere in Latin America come here to the US, the first world economy, we come with a certain way of seeing the world. We come with certain lenses. And we believe that who we are is this person. And we have a predetermined mindset about what is possible for us to achieve in our lives in the US. And many times we hold ourselves back. And these cultural limiting beliefs are passed from one generation to another. It goes one after the other after the other. So that's why I wanted to bring this topic that to me is extremely fascinating and I have been researching in the last years. And now I'm putting all together in my upcoming book, Uncolonized Latinas. So as I tell my story, I will sprinkle it with some of these cultural limiting beliefs that came to my awareness, and I hope will inspire you as well. So my story starts in a small rural town in Argentina called General Belgrano. It was a town of unpaved streets, and you can imagine cows and dogs walking outside of my house. That was my childhood. That was my reality. My father did not have the opportunity to go to high school. He had to start working at 11. And my mom went to high school, but it was impossible for her to go to college. It was just not what women did back then. But since I was very young and I was doing really well at school, I became the hope for my parents that I would one day be the one to go to college and move to Buenos Aires. Even though they didn't know how to, and this is something that I honor about my parents, they didn't know how they would pay for that, but they held the dream. They didn't set limits for that. And they always believed that I could make it happen no matter what. So with that confidence in my back, coming from my parents, at the age of 18, I moved to Buenos Aires, started to work full time, and went to college at the same time to pay for my education. So, and that's when now I can see now, I didn't see that back then, but now I can see that I encountered my first cultural limiting belief, lack. So when you feel lacking, you feel that you're not good enough, that you're not as prepared as others. And I could see those kids from high schools, the best high schools in Buenos Aires, sitting next to me, and I felt small, right? So lack becomes a problem when you start holding yourself back because you shy away from opportunities. You stop speaking up. You stop bringing yourself fully in 100%. And the way to cope with that lack that I felt inside was to work harder. So adrenaline, push through, work harder, study more. So I started to work for PricewaterhouseCoopers, for Procter & Gamble, and I felt my lack. And as first generation to go into those spaces, corporate, I didn't know even how to dress for corporate. So going into those spaces as the first one in the family, as you know, is very hard. And that's when all these, limiting cultural beliefs get stronger because you have no one in your house that can really say, yeah, you're doing the right thing, or you're going, it's working out. Or internally, you may ask yourself, why me? And do I have what it takes to succeed? So time moved on. I got married, and an opportunity came to come to the US for an MBA. And I felt my lack. I said, I'm not sure I will be successful. I don't know. But my husband and I came here. We applied. We came to the Tax School of Business at Dartmouth. We graduated. I worked for Citibank. My summer was in McKinsey. Went to Regis Benckiser. And that's when I encountered my second cultural limiting belief, unworthiness. Unworthiness is very unconscious and it's tricky. That's why it's so pervasive. So I will give you some examples of how that unworthiness showed up in my life. I went 7 years without asking for a salary increase. I told myself, I don't know how to negotiate. I don't know how to do this. But internally, deep inside, I felt unworthy, right? I never asked for sponsors or mentors. I felt that I had to be thankful to be allowed to live in this country, even once I had the US passport and the citizenship. And I worked really hard to prove everybody that they had made the right decision to hire me because I felt unworthy, not deserving of the space that I had. So in 2016, the pushing through, the working hard, and the adrenaline ran out, and I burnt out. I had to quit my job because I was mentally and physically exhausted, and that was a major blessing. So what happened in that time of silence and introspection was that I encountered again the person that I had disconnected most from, myself. And in that space, I started to see how I had held myself back, and I started to become more conscious about these patterns running me. And I became fascinated about studying them and researching them. So let me share one quote from Carl Jung that says, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." So that was my first real adaptability. Be aware of what's running me and embrace also those voices of limitation. Don't push them away. Love everything, including those voices that tell you that you are not good enough. When you love them, they start to dissolve. The second part of this coming back in a different way was to honor myself. When I started to honor myself and started to like who I am, my lack became resourcefulness. I started to think differently about myself. I started to have more positive images and thoughts about who I am. That's how I measured that I was making progress. My mindset started to change. My inner dialogue started to change. And lack became resourcefulness. I went into the world looking for opportunities, knowing that I could figure that out. No matter what, I could figure things out. And my unworthiness became placing myself first, always. So asking for what I need, going after, salary increases, asking for that money. I deserve that. And it's a way to put myself first, advocating for myself. And the third part, so becoming aware of my limiting pattern was big. Honoring myself and taking action from that place of embracing who I am was extremely important, but that's not enough. I discovered a third major pillar that I believe we have untapped. It's untapped for us as a community, and is working together. I feel that as Latinos, we have not yet, and I will use that word, not yet, united. We have colorism within the community. We have competition, accent, no accent, born in the US, born abroad, cultural backgrounds, education. And we have a huge opportunity if we want to turn around those statistics that show that we are not in leadership positions yet. We need to work together to really accept other Latinos, to elevate other people. So here's my invitation for you. Become more aware of what's running you, number one. Start liking who you are. Spend more time with yourself. Start loving you more, right? And the third one, please, today, help another Latino. Provide advice. Tell somebody in the Latino community they are doing great. Support that person. We really need that as a collective to transform ourselves, because that's the way we're going to create the future in this country. So I will leave you with another quote, and this is from a writer from Argentina, José Hernández Martín Fierro. Los hermanos sean unidos porque esa es la ley primera. Si entre ellos se pelean, los devoran los de afuera. In English, it would be, let brothers and sisters, I will add that, be united, because if they compete with themselves, the outsiders will devour them. So do the inner work. We need each one of us to do the inner work, and the results will show in our collective, in our new collective as Latinos. Thank you so much for this time. It's been an honor. Happy Heritage Month. And with this, I want to introduce our next speaker, Dr. José Morey. He's the Chief Executive Officer for Ad Astra Media and Eisenhower Fellow. And his topic is going to be Renaissance and Resilience, Lessons on Remaining Innovative in an Ever-Evolving World.
Hey, good evening, everyone, and good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you are. And thank you to the Alumni Society for inviting me to speak on this panel. And thank you to the amazing speakers that have already come and to the ones that will come afterwards. And thank you all for your time to listen to me for the next 10 minutes. I'd like to set the setting, starting out with Thomas Friedman's book. I'm sure some of you may have read it. Thank you for being late. And in that book, Mr. Friedman argues that we as humans, we become adaptable creatures. We've been able to rise to the pinnacle of evolution, at the top of the food chain, to be able to survive and to exceed. However, now is a time of evolution within the areas of technology. The speed of evolution within technology is really hard for people to keep up with. Think about it as, for example, from Moore's Law. It's a very good example. Moore's Law, as some of you might know, is this concept that processing speed doubles every 2 years, roughly. Imagine if you applied that as a case study to another piece of technology. Let's say you took a 1971 Volkswagen Beetle and you bought it fresh, brand new, right? Back in 71. But now, if that Beetle, that piece of technology had followed Moore's Law, well, that same car would cost you today around 4 cents. That car could survive on one gas tank for the entire life of when you owned it. And that car could go up to 300,000 miles per hour. See, that's the thing that's going on with technology. It's evolving at a rate so fast that even our own natural evolution can't keep up with it. This is why individuals, governments, corporations, everyone's playing catch up. Everyone's always trying to stay up with the latest lingo of blockchain, or what exactly is a xenobot or biomechatronics. And high function professionals are having the same thing. That's why so many are struggling with issues like burnout, because they've never been able to adapt to this level of change. Municipalities are having the same thing. They're struggling with dealing with autonomous vehicles, ride hailing, or applications such as those self-charging scooters, which appear to replicate overnight instantaneously. Corporations are trying to figure out now, all right, what's our artificial intelligence strategy? When 2 years ago, they couldn't even figure out how to reboot their computers, it seemed. So how does a country, how does a company, how does a group of people, how do we as individuals, as humans, how do we manage to keep up with that rate of innovation? How do we remain innovative? Can we keep up? And if so, how? Well, to look at how the future is going, we have to go back and look at the past. At the time when there was an equal amount of great innovation, the Renaissance, and there's something that we can learn from one of the greatest innovators ever to be here, Leonardo da Vinci. Now, over the centuries, there's been a lot that's been written about the master, but there's still a lot that we can learn. See, Leonardo lived in a time that was very similar to our own, a time of great change, technologically, artistically, politically. In those days, people were always talking about people like Leonardo, Columbus, Gutenberg. Now we mention folks like Jobs, Musk, and Bezos. He could have been considered kind of the father of the gig economy. I mean, if you asked right now 100 people, if we took a survey of everyone that was listening and said, what did Leonardo do? What was he known for? Most people would probably say that, well, he was an amazing artist. The thing is that if you ask Leonardo himself, that's probably not what he would answer. See, Leonardo had a very different perspective on who he was. And that's one of the first lessons we can learn from him of how to remain resilient and innovative. He was equal parts an engineer, a mechanic, anatomist, botanist, geologist, architect, and the list goes on and on. See, if you ask Leonardo to build a column, he would build it to the specifications, right? It could hold the load it was supposed to, it would follow all the guidelines, be able to pass everything that it needed to. But at the same time, he would build something that was equally as beautiful, that could be in a museum, even to this day. And Leonardo actually wrote a lot. He had many articles, many journals that he kept. So he actually wrote a curriculum vitae at the time when he was turning around 30. So at that point, he thought, his life was coming to an end. He was 30. His career wasn't where he wanted it. And he actually wrote a resume to the governor of Milan, who was looking for a municipal position at the time. So he wrote a 9-paragraph essay, essentially, as to who he was, what he could bring to the table. And he wrote about all the things that he thought were important that he could do. Talked about civics, architecture, engineering, his military prowess, all the different bridges he could build and waterways, cannons, and other military vehicles. In the very last line, he said, oh yes, likewise in painting, I can do everything possible. So yes, all these other things that he could do. And as a painter, yeah, I can paint as well. But see, Leonardo was also the living example of the benefits of STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, and the importance of STEAM education, combining the arts with the sciences. That's what we do at Astra. We create STEAM educational content to inspire underrepresented youth to go into the fields of STEAM. This is something that we can learn from Leonardo himself of how to remain innovative, that combination of the arts and the sciences. We could see it in his iconic symbol, the Vitruvian Man, which is a perfectly proportioned man inside a circle, inside a square. In this symbiosis of art and science, we see it in some of the most innovative products today. Think of the iPhone. Yes, an amazing piece of technology, revolutionized an industry, revolutionized the way we live. But at the same time, a beautiful aesthetic piece of art that integrates very well with the human form. Steve Jobs himself often referred to innovation was really at the cross-section of engineering and art. It was there that was the epicenter of innovation. The integration of STEAM is the foundation of many great innovators, not just Leonardo. Think of Ada Lovelace. She was a daughter of a poet and a mathematician. Or Albert Einstein, famous polymath, great in physics, but also played the violin, and often stated that when he had a tough mathematical problem to solve, he would look to the arts to cause him to rejuvenate in his thought process, to be able to solve that difficult technological barrier. And this isn't surprising, because we know that there's amazing benefits from the arts, understanding the arts, appreciating them, studying them, to be able to think critically, as well as other mental and physical health benefits. The other aspect that we can learn from Leonardo is that he was a lifelong learner. It was something that he practiced. This is something that we need today to stay up with technology. Long gone are the days in which an expert can just kind of rest on their laurels, whether professionally or academically. One has to continue to learn in all fields to be able to strengthen our core skills as we develop new ones. I like to call it being a jack of all trades and a master as needed. One has to be able to speak at a basic level really on all sciences today, regardless of the field that they might be prepared to deep dive or when an expert is needed in that field. Because right now there's so much intersectionality. All the sciences, all the industries are overlapping. No longer is it just one field or one innovation in your particular industry that tends to come and displace a business. Oftentimes it's an innovation in a completely different field that tends to do it. Think of, it's not the combustion engine which has evolved to really disrupt the automobile industry. It's the brand new electric engine. It's not a new form of public transportation itself that's been developed to disrupt taxis or other commuter services. It's been the development of satellites and ride-sharing software. Same thing in medicine, my background. It's not new types of physicians that have been developed, but it's convolutional neural networks and machine learning that's been disrupted. Another attribute that Leonardo used to remain cutting edge that we can learn from is his insatiable curiosity. He maintained a constant sense of wonder. You can see this throughout everything that Leonardo depicted, whether it was just a drawing of birds or just simply eddies in a stream. This insatiable curiosity always led him to ask questions, to seek out those who he thought knew better than himself. Leonardo always knew that if he was the smartest person in the room, he was in the wrong room. And he went out to seek those that knew more than he did. This teaches us that lesson in innovation, that we first have to be honest with our own limitations, regardless of what status of success we might have. In life, if we stop learning after a certain age, it's detrimental. But often it happens to those higher learners and higher achievers. In psychology, it's a bit of a paradox, but we tend to transition from being learners to being knowers. And this is a phenomenon that a lot of high achievers struggle with. This is because at some point we transition to being a knower and quote unquote being an expert, either by our peers or by ourselves. And this can cause us to get into this negative reinforcement cycle in which we're afraid that if we say we don't know, we ask questions, that people may think we're imposters, or sometimes we ourselves think that we're the imposter. The other rate limiting step is something that's called the spotlight effect, which is exacerbated by social media, which is this fear that people are constantly watching you and analyzing you and ready to pounce when you make a mistake. But Leonardo never left that learning stage, and it's something that we have to do ourselves. See, Leonardo lived in a time that was a lot like our own, and this is why we have so much that we can learn from the master. His ability to combine the arts, the sciences, technology, humanities, and imagination remain the enduring recipe for resiliency, creativity, and innovation. And his relentless curiosity and experimentation outside of his comfort zone is something that we need to strive to learn ourselves and to teach to our community and our children. These are the seeds of innovation. They are the skills that will help us to transition from a life of success to a life of significance. Thank you very much. I'd like to now turn it to our next speaker, Ana Villegas, who is the Chief Marketing Officer for NI. Thank you, Ana.
Thank you, Jose. I'm a great fan of Leonardo da Vinci, and I love all around innovation. Great session, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for inviting me to join this event. Very short intro about me, and maybe you can share, Jill, the picture I show with me as a little girl. Yes, I grew up in Peru. I grew up in Peru as a very shy girl with really no voice, and with a family that was expecting me to become a traditional, wife in Latin America and do not study and take care of my family. Those were the expectations for me. So really, really no expectations. Where I ended up was really having to define the path for myself. And, I've been now 20 years here. I lead marketing for a large company, and I have a family. But all of that has not been easy. And the reason why I'm here is, I want to share some of these stories. took me years to figure out some of the things I'm going to share with you. So hopefully for some of you, it's like, okay, I can get this learning from Anna. But I'm going to talk today about one of the superpowers that I think is very important. I think as Latinos and, being a very important part of the community in the States, it's something we need to take and always learn and grow. And this skill is adaptability. And for me, there is no adaptability if you don't keep your authenticity. So you will hear me talk about both. And I think that I always want to see both connected. And that's one big lesson that I had to learn myself. So let me start with my first story that take us back to the 1988. And I was just at that point graduated from an all-girls Catholic school. And I have decided to pursue engineering. And I thought that getting my family and my dad to, agree to this, and then being able to get accepted to this very, very difficult engineering program was going to be the most difficult thing. And really the most difficult thing was my first day that I arrived to this school, and I realized that they were all men, and then it was me. And coming from a girls' school and a completely protected thing, I didn't know how to talk to these folks. And I think they didn't know what to do with me, right? They were like, no, we're all going to the bar. We're talking about girls. See you later. So those first weeks were very difficult because I really rethink if I should stay or if I should leave and go pursue a career that was more women friendly. And fortunately for me, I decided to stay. And I said, you know what? I'm going to conquer this. I didn't know how to, but I said I'm going to start and talk to my friends and get some advice. And the three things that really helped me through this process was, first, I spent time listening, right? You have to listen to your customers. In this case, they were, the people who were my peers, and learning about who they were and what they were about. The second thing I did was started to create connections to some of them. And the third one was building that relationship that really helped me to become part of the tribe. And my most really happy moment was when we were in, I think, my year 3, and this picture that I showed earlier is from that group. When I arrived one day, right, and they were planning to go to a bar, and I'm like, okay, guys, see you tomorrow. And he's like, no, we're not going to go to like a men's bar. We're going to go to a restaurant. I want you to come with us. And I was like, oh. And one of them said, it's because we see you as our sister, and we see you as something we want you to be with us, and we want to protect you, and we want to make sure we are honoring who you are. So that was my first taste of how important was to adapt. And sometimes things are not how you expected, but you have to learn how to deal with the situation. And there is another big thing that I learned from this experience. I learned, and it was my first taste of being a minority and how it feels like, right? Because I was a Latina, and in my girls' school, I was one more. And here was the different one. And it really struck my compassion for others. So now, as I have built my career and I work and mentor, I'm always thinking, who is having challenge with fitting in? Who is the minority in the room? Who we need to help? And who do we need to open the door with? And that was just, again, one of the first stories on my career. So let me move to my second story. And I call my second story Coming to America because that's what I did. So 20 years ago, which coincidentally was the year of September level, I have been accepted to a master in Kellogg. So with my life savings, which were $2,000 and $100,000 in loans, I came to Chicago. And September 11 happened, and of course there were no work for international people, and eventually I was able to get the job way after I have graduated. and I accepted a job at Dell. This job was entry level, I was managing in Peru a large team. I have built a career. This one was going back 2 or 3 levels and starting as an entry person. And it was doing forecasting. So I was like, okay, I can do this. So I should be amazing in this job because I have to step down, and I've been doing this for a while. So that first year, I worked like crazy, long hours. I did everything my manager asked for. I delivered, and if he asked for more reports, I delivered more reports. And then end of year comes, and it's like my performance review, which I've never heard about. You don't have that in Peru. So anyway, so I went to my performance review meeting, and I get an average. And I'm like, I don't understand. I really work like crazy. I did everything you told me I was supposed to do. Why average? And he's like, well, in relation with other people and you're 360 and blah, 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 yours not as good as others. So I left that meeting very frustrated. I was like, what's going on? What's wrong? And that's when my second lesson in adaptability started, which was I have been so focused in just doing what people were telling me, right? Do this, do this, do this. I haven't stepped back to see, wait a second, the way you are successful in corporate America is different than the way I was successful in Peru. To start with, in Peru, when you go to a meeting and your manager is there, he's the one who talks. You don't talk. You don't start selling what you're doing. You don't say, oh, you know what? I just launched this. You don't tell that. People just, at least in my times, will see you, right, and see she's doing amazing, and they will just, you get the promotion. So here I had to learn a new way of having mentors. Wow, that was very important. Networking. Knowing that other managers knew who I was, so they can also advocate with me. Learning that I had to be able to tell my story and have a voice. And I had to work so hard to get there. It took me years. It probably took me almost 4 years, like practicing, etc., to start going back to get to a level where I was when I was in Peru. And I remember practicing in front of the mirror, how to speak, right? Practicing how to, say a point, an executive, etc. So this story has 2 parts. The first part is, from a work perspective, I was successful. So I made a career deal, got promoted, keep going up, get raises, got bigger teams, great reviews, blah, blah, blah. But I realized when I actually moved to NI and COVID hit that I have left out the piece that was more important, which was the heart. So I have I'm a left brain and right brain, and I have become this executive robot, if I have to be very honest, right? Everything was good. Everything was amazing. And, but I didn't talk about the things I care about. I didn't talk about my people. I didn't talk about diversity and inclusion. I didn't talk about STEM. And those were topics that were important to me. So I really used the COVID time to rethink and refocus who I wanted to become and how in this adaptability process, I have lost a little bit of myself. So I brought back that authenticity. If you look at my LinkedIn profile now, it says I'm a left brain, right brain with a heart. And I eventually was able to build a narrative around my story. I care about diversity and inclusion, and I'll support it. I care about STEM. I sit on the board for a nonprofit that supports girls in technology from low-income families. I sit on the board for an organization that supports artisans from around the world, women artisans. I also sit on the Council for Diversity and Inclusion and in my company, and I am executive sponsor for my Latino ERG. And I mentor, women and Latinos, and I help others. And I dedicate big part of my time. Yes, I still have a job, right? I have to be the executive. I have to deliver, but I dedicate a big chunk of my time also to advocate and to support all of these initiatives. And that for me was a lesson in terms of bringing your authenticity back to the table. Let me see where I see how much time I have left. Sorry, I'm learning about this system. Where it is? Oh, I don't have time left actually. Okay, so let me move to introducing Dulce Vasquez. She's a candidate for Los Angeles City Council, District 9, and she's going to talk about the immigrant trait and what it took to get her from undocumented to city council candidate. And thank you.
Good morning, afternoon, or evening from wherever you're tuning in from. I want to thank the Alumni Society for this opportunity to share my story. Thank you to Pedro, Vianney, and Jill for having the vision and doing the work to connect such amazingly talented Latino leaders from across the country. The topic is adaptability, and when I started to think about these remarks, I kept thinking that this is just a trait that comes standard in the recipe for the making of an immigrant. After all, my parents, and I'm sure all of your parents, had to adapt and roll with the punches of living in this country. My dad has a degree in agriculture, and when he came to the US, worked as a dairy farmer before now working in construction. My mom has a degree in English, and when she migrated, she became a nanny and now cleans houses. My grandfather went from being the general manager of an auto dealership to working at a recycling plant. So let me share my immigrant story because from day one, this is a trait that is ingrained in all of us. Let me set the stage for you. August 8th, 1993. I was 7 years old. My grandfather took me to the Mexico City airport. I was wearing the best dress I owned. I had the shiny white shoes, the charol, with the lace socks. Y'all know exactly what I'm talking about. My grandfather dropped me off at the gate, and en el otro lado, my mom was gonna pick me up. We took off, and 45 minutes into the flight, we turned right back around to Mexico City. The plane had a malfunction. So we all file back into the waiting area, and here I am, 7 years old, by myself. By this time, my grandfather had gone back to our little town, not like there were any cell phones back then to let anyone know what was happening. So this is exactly the situation where teaching kids don't talk to strangers didn't quite work, because after some time, your girl was getting hungry. And in a scene straight out of a telenovela, this tall, skinny, blonde woman with her shorter, larger, balder husband approached me and tried to speak to me in English. I remember the fear that I had in my belly of telling them that I was alone. But to this day, I have no idea what they said to me or what I said to them, but I got a hot dog and a Coca-Cola out of it. And when we finally made it, you can imagine my mother's stress and horror after not hearing from us for hours if I'd made it back on the plane. But sure enough, it wasn't long before immigration called her over the airport loudspeaker to come and see them. Now, I like to think that I was a shy, quiet kid, but my mom tells me otherwise because apparently I told the immigration officers that on my student visa, mind you, I was gonna come live here forever. I was gonna go to school and make friends and go to Disney and go to McDonald's. My mother was mortified that they were about to put me right back on that plane in Mexico. And once she told them that I was just a kid, I was here to visit for a few weeks, that 7-year-old's goals all eventually came true, starting with McDonald's, where my parents immediately took me, and my stepdad, I will never forget, as soon as I was done with my Happy Meal, asked, "Can we send you back now?" But at the end of it, and unbeknownst to me at the time, the student visa eventually expired and I became undocumented. One morning, my mom walked into my room to wake me up like she did every morning. This time, she was somber and sad. I could tell she'd been crying, and when she broke the news that my great-grandmother had died, I asked if we were going to go to the funeral. That's when she explained to me that if I ever went back to Mexico, I could never come back to the US. That fear has defined so many of our stories. The thought that we could lose everything with one wrong move shapes us. And in our formative years, we forego opportunities. We hide. We make up excuses for why we can't do things. I missed many school field trips because I couldn't travel. But you adapt to that fear. You absorb it. It becomes part of you, knowing that your family could get separated with one broken taillight. My parents spent so much time and so much money with lawyer after lawyer. But eventually, in the year 2000, without any fanfare, I got a stamp on my passport and I became a legal permanent resident. And shortly thereafter, I got my first blue American passport in the mail. I recognize how incredibly lucky and privileged I am when there are almost 1 million DACA recipients and millions more undocumented. But my world opened up and it became clear that I could have goals and that I could achieve them. The American dream became possible. I set out to get an education, to have a career, to get married, and to buy a home. And at 28 years old, after getting a full scholarship and graduating from an elite institution that we all know was not designed for people who look like me or come from my background, after surviving a stressful, hostile, and abusive work environment, after meeting and marrying the best person I know, and after navigating the complex mountain of barriers that women and people of color face to buying their first home, I realized that every dream and goal I'd had at 14 and every dream my parents had had for me, I'd just achieved. ¿Y ahora qué? What was next? Time to adapt again. I had to take a step back and reassess how I wanted to spend my life and where my energy could be most useful. I had spent years mentoring young women, helping, pulling others up because I truly believe that that's how we all succeed. I wanted to make sure that the difficulties and barriers I'd faced, that other Latinas would have someone to help them through it, to help edit college essays, to revise resumes and cover letters, to make connections where their parents couldn't, because neither could mine. And I've spent years working in higher education to expand opportunities for Latinos because I didn't realize how rare my story was. But all of that was not enough. Through the pandemic, I saw the suffering. I saw the gaps. I saw how our parents and tios and neighbors were all of a sudden essential, but only essential when our society needs something from them, not when it comes time to help them get access to healthcare, get access to support for their businesses that were shuttered, get help paying the rent and the mortgage so that they don't have to blow their life savings, get tutoring for our kids who don't have parents that can work remote jobs to help them get through school, to get help for the many students that had to drop out of college to help their parents through the pandemic, to get help for the many who lost parents, tias, and grandparents, just like I did. And through my own experience and the experience of my family, I saw an opening, not just to help one person at a time, but to help be the voice for the 250,000 people who live in my community, 80% of whom are Latino. I found not just a goal, but I found my purpose. I'm Dulce Vasquez, and I'm running for Los Angeles City Council to uplift my community and to keep sharing my story, because it's the same story that keeps repeating itself, and we need to break that cycle. I'm running to make Los Angeles livable and equitable. I'm running to uplift our stories of love and devotion, resilience and adaptability. I'm running because we belong at the table. I'm running because we have to dream bigger, together, of an inclusive society that values and appreciates us. I'm running, and every single person listening to this should be considering running too. Gracias.